All right, everybody, welcome into another edition of the List Podcast brought to you by our good friends at the Man Salon and Bookmaker. Joining me this week is Michelle Smallmon. We have done ESPN Radio together, and now we get to have some fun with a topic that I know is near and dear to her heart and one that is near and dear to my heart, 90s musical artists. And for her, we're getting into the St. Louis Cardinals. Michelle, welcome into the List Podcast. How you doing today?
Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pumped to be here. And this list was not easy to put together, either one, but especially this top 10 Cardinals list. This was very tough.
So it's always interesting with the list that we do on this show because I reach out to the person that's coming on and I let them pick the list that we're going to do, give you some options. But I was pretty sure we were going to do this one with regards to your background, being a St. Louis girl. And I have a background being around the Cardinals too, in just a different form. My grandfather, huge Cardinals fan. My mom, my grandma. So when we'd go to Hayward in Iowa, we'd always watch Cardinals games. And I started watching the Cardinals probably in 1990 on. And I always say in sports, a lot of things don't happen until I was born. So 1985 and beyond. Mine's more centric to Cardinals that were 85 and beyond. And that's the great, subjective nature of the list is you get to argue what your favorites are. And some of it's based on what you actually saw. Now, I do have some people on my list that played before 85. But again, a little bit subjective. And then the 90s musical list, so subjective because we all like different music. So we'll get to that in just a second. But we're going to let you start since you're the guest here on the List Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. That's where you can find us. We'll have you unveil your 10 through 6 top St. Louis Cardinals of all time. Fire away.
So, Jeff, I'm starting a bit controversial with number 10. Okay. I know that there are some Cardinals fans that will 100% agree with me, and there are some that will throw their hands up and say, amazing, but he shouldn't make the top 10 Cardinals of all time list. Coming in at number 10, it's David Freese. He gave me the most special postseason moments that I'll ever have in my entire life, and he gave the Cardinals a World Series championship in 2011. One of the most unbelievable postseason runs we've ever been on. He hit 348, 7 RBI, 3 doubles, and of course, that epic Game 6 home run that kept the Cardinals alive and pushed them to Game 7, ultimately winning the World Series.
I just got noticed that David Freese has declined the spot on the top 10 list, just like he did the Hall of Fame for the Cardinals. He has declined your spot at number 10.
He makes me think he's a Cardinals Hall of Famer. I do. He's a humble king. We respect his choice. I think he's a Cardinals Hall of Famer, and he's certainly top 10 on my list.
All right, what do you got at number 9?
Okay, let's move on to number 9. Another controversial name, but to me, in my lifetime, you cannot put a list together of the top 10 St. Louis Cardinals and not include Mark McGwire. What Mark McGwire did in 99 with the home run chase, he not only saved baseball, Jeff, he might have saved the Cardinals baseball as we know it, because prior to his arrival, the Cardinals were in a bad spot. People were not going to games the way that they did. And Mark McGwire shows up and he lights St. Louis on fire. I will never forget at that time when the home run chase was going on. We were the talk of the world, St. Louis was. I mean, the media that came, it wasn't only national media that was at Busch Stadium. It was international media. There was 10,000 plus tens of thousands of people that would come to batting practice just to see this guy hit home runs before the game. So I have to put Mark McGwire on the list. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame, breaking Roy Ramirez's record. And he's one of the best guys that's been in the organization. He was the hitting coach in 2011. He's the one that told Tony La Russa, we need to stick with David Freese. He's getting hot at the right time. So we might not have a World Series championship in 2011 without Mark McGwire. And we certainly wouldn't have had all of those great memories and the home run chase without him as well.
Yeah, he's on my list. I'll get to where he's on mine in a little bit. Who do you got at number 8?
At number 8, we went old school. We went with Rogers Hornsby. There's
really old school, right?
There's so many old school guys that didn't make the list, and it was very hard to leave them out. But when I was looking at Rogers Hornsby's stats, I mean, just outrageous. He won 6 batting titles. He hit over 400 3 times. He led the league in homers twice, RBIs 4 times. He won 2 Triple Crowns, and he led the National League in doubles 4 times and triples once. In 13 years as a Cardinal, here's his slash line: 359, 427, 568. They won the World Series in 1926. He was inducted into Cooperstown in 1942. The numbers are there. Even though I obviously didn't see him play, he is one of those players that helped establish the standard of excellence that we know to be Cardinals baseball.
Yeah, he might be on my list as well. But again, you have to go way back in the archives to find those statistics. At number 7, greatest Cardinals of all time. Michelle, who do you got?
One of the most beloved Cardinals of all time, the redhead, Red Shandies. Again, went old school. His last
I don't even know who that is, to be honest with you. I've never heard of him in my entire life.
Well, then you must not be that loyal of a Cardinals fan. Red Shandies?
I'm a Braves fan. I just said I followed the Cardinals, all right? Like, I didn't know who this dude is, right?
Well, he's a Hall of Famer. His number was number 2 is on the wall in Busch Stadium. He's retired. He was a 9-time All-Star. He helped them win the 1946 World Series. He played just a skosh under 1,800 games for the team. He was a part of the organization for the longest time. I mean, Red Shandies is one of the all-time most iconic Cardinals.
So this is going to be one of those omissions on these lists that I have to go back and read about, and then later I'm going to be like, damn it, I should have had that person on my list, and I was schooled. That's why we do these. Sometimes it's educational for yours truly as well. I'm Jeff Turin. That's Michelle Smallmon. All right, who do you got at number 6?
At number 6, he just went into the Hall of Fame wearing the birds on the bat. You have to go with Scott Rowland. I mean, this guy was, outside of Nolan Arenado and Brooks Robinson, likely the best defensive third baseman that we will ever see. He won the 1997 Rookie of the Year, 8 Gold Gloves, 7 All-Star nominations, and, of course, a World Series with the Cardinals. He was one of the cornerstones of those great Cardinals teams in the 2000s. Scott Rowland has to be on the list.
All right, so 10 through 6, there's Michelle's list. I have a couple of people on here that I have as sort of honorable mentions. I wanted to put Keith Hernandez on there. I wanted to put Jimmy Edmonds on my top 10. They were on the outside looking in. But at number 10, talk about controversy, because the numbers aren't going to stack up to probably what many people consider greatest Cardinals of all time. But in my lifetime, especially over the last decade or so, when I think of the St. Louis Cardinals, I think of who I have at number 10. I have Yadier Molina at number 10. I think all the greatness that you got from Wainwright and the other pitchers over the last decade plus could be so attributed to what Yadi did behind the plate. You see the struggles this year without him, man. I mean, like, this dude was a maestro behind home plate. And I think more for the intangibles sometimes than anything when I put him at number 10. I was always a fan of how he came up in clutch moments. They needed him to be back there, consistently. And that dude was a warrior, fighting through all kinds of injuries to be behind the plate. So that's more maybe of a sentimental pick, but I have Yadier. What do you think of me putting Yadi at number 10?
He's in my top 5.
Whoa, really? Okay, then I feel better about him after I missed this redheaded dude. I'm just happy that I have Yadi at number 10. I'm just happy I do. All right, at number 9, you just mentioned Scott Rowland, and a lot of people will think of him as what he did in Philly, but I just think dude was not only a consummate pro, had all the statistics to back it up, Hall of Famer, wearing the birds as he goes in to Cooperstown, and so I thought Scott Rowland was always one of the players in baseball when he was playing at his prime, and that's why I had him at number 9. And you mentioned I have Roger Hornsby at number 8, and again, I have a couple of dudes that played before my time, and I think there's only 3 of them on my list that really played before my time. And Roger Hornsby is a name that if you say, people know, hey, he was a great baseball player. Talk about the card that's worth so much money. You talk about what he did for the Cardinals back in the day. And you mentioned those numbers are insane. And I know it's against different competition. So I think sometimes when we put older people on these lists, you go, well, who are they playing against? Well, he dominated. The 400 mark is so hard to get to. We all know that. We don't see that in the modern game. And the fact that he was able to do it 3 times was just flat out amazing. So Roger Hornsby at number 8. And then at number 7, I have Willie McGee. I think just another name you think of when you think of the St. Louis Cardinals. Do you have him in your top 5?
I didn't, and it broke my heart to leave Willie McGee off. It was between him and David Freese for number 10, and I had to go with Freezer.
Yeah, and I think, again, you look at the numbers, you look at the impact to that city, to that baseball team. And when you said it broke your heart, it just shows that so many Cardinal fans loved him, right? Like he was a guy that was truly a fan favorite, a name that my grandfather always brought up amongst those. Now, he wasn't in that top 3 list for my grandfather. The guys that were are much higher up on my list, but another name that put up the numbers, and that was a sentimental favorite there. And at number 6, I got Lou Brock. I think when you think of Cardinals baseball, another name that comes up, the left fielder that just put up, I mean, he had over 10,000 at bats, over 3,000 hits. The home run numbers weren't, crazy, 149 home runs, career average just below 300, but 900 RBIs, 938 stolen bases, and, the on-base percentage of 343. Dude could get on the OPS 753. The stats just back up that he's a top 6 Cardinal in my opinion of all time. And another name that was, I think, if I were to ask my grandfather, there's 2 names that were above, 3 names that were above probably Willie McGee, and Lou Brock was one of them. So there's my number 6. All right, Michelle Smallmon joining us here on the List Podcast, brought to you by Bookmaker and the Man Salon, themansalon.net. Find all the locations to get your haircut from our friends over at the Man Salon. All right, who do you got 5 through 1, Michelle?
Okay, before I give 5 through 1, I just want some justice for Red Schoendienst here, Jeff. He not only was an exceptional player for the Cardinals.
I just can't believe that, I don't know who this dude is. All this. So there was a name, and I'm going blank on it too. Recently that somebody was giving me a hard time about, what is his name? He was in this baseball song that sometimes the older people I just don't know, and I get a lot of crap for it. So it's go ahead, you can give him more justice if you'd like. I just don't know who he is.
I just want to tell you. So not only was he an exceptional player for the Cardinals, he was the manager for a long time. I just looked it up to confirm. He had the 2nd longest managerial tenure in Cardinals history behind Tony La Russa. And he was the manager when they won the 1967 and 1968 NL pennants and the 67 World Series. He was the manager of the year twice. He's a baseball Hall of Famer. I mean, this is a guy who is a cornerstone of the St. Louis Cardinals organization. And he's a local guy. So we all love Red.
I'm terrible. I mean, I deserve to go to Cardinals hell for that. I apologize. Okay. So
Okay.
I looked him up, and I still have it didn't come to me and go, I still have no idea. I'm glad he was great. I'm glad you guys love him. It's awesome that he's in the Hall of Fame. I got to read up on the dude. That's my bad.
Okay. So he was number 6 on your list. He's number 5. What is it? What am I on? Number 5 now?
You're number 5. Yep.
Number 5 for me, it's Lou Brock. Like you said, one of the all-time great Cardinals, Hall of Famer, Cardinals Hall of Famer. His numbers retired. You went through a lot of the stats, but I just think the stolen bases alone is one of the most remarkable stats in all of baseball. 888 stolen bases as a Cardinal. That's a franchise record. That thing will never be touched. It will never be stolen. He's one of the most electric and athletic players that the franchise has ever seen.
Yeah, the stolen base numbers are just absolutely amazing. Who do you have at number 4?
At number 4, I have number 4. It's Yadier Molina. And I know a lot of people might think it's crazy to have him this high on the list. As someone that watched him and covered him for a long time, he deserves to be this high. Yadier Molina was the culture of the St. Louis Cardinals during their success in the early 2000s up until when he retired last year. That guy set the standard. He set the tone. He not only was arguably the greatest catcher in the history of the game, right up there with Johnny Bench. He was a guy that came in clutch in any situation at any moment. How many postseason hits did Yadier Molina have? How many moments did he elevate the team and get them where they needed to be? He's a force multiplier. He had this intensity about him that he would bring to a game, whether it was a Tuesday in April or if it was game 2 of the World Series. That's Yadier Molina. He's one of the all-time great Cardinals that we've ever seen. He's a World Series champion twice, and he's number 4 on the list.
I can't disagree with you on putting him in the top 10. I just think of him when I think of Cardinals baseball over the last 10 to 15 years as much as anyone. And it was the stable force through sort of the changing of the rosters and, the departure of Albert Pujols and these other guys that were able to come in and help win a World Series. I mean, Yadier Molina was a staple for sure. Who do you have at number 3?
Number 3, it's Ozzie Smith, the Wizard. Again, one of the all-time great Cardinals. 11 of his 13 career Gold Glove awards in a uniform, 14 All-Star games. Of course, the iconic home run and the World Series, Hall of Famer. That number 1 is again on the wall. Every Cardinals, even though I was so young at the time, one of the memories and that's emblazoned in my brain of what we think of when we think of Cardinal baseball is Ozzie Smith doing the backflip. He's one of the best guys you'll ever meet, still very involved in the organization. Cardinals baseball is not what it is without Ozzie Smith.
Yeah, and that was number 2 on my grandfather's list of favorite Cardinals, and probably number 1 for my mom. And I just, like you mentioned, no one ran to the base, to their position like Ozzie Smith with the backflip, and that is, when you say Ozzie Smith, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that. The second thing is the home run in the World Series. And then it's just him being a nice guy and someone that seems so personable within the sport, such a great ambassador for the game of baseball. And, oh, yeah, all the numbers that come along with it, and what he did for that organization, the All-Star appearances, the Gold Gloves. Dude was a maestro there in the field at shortstop. So Ozzie Smith is definitely in my top 5, and I thought he was just spectacular. Who do you got next?
Okay, number 2, Bob Gibson. 17 years with the organization, 528 career outings. He won 251 games, a 2.91 ERA. He won the National League Cy Young and 68 and 70 MVP award. They changed the game for him, Jeff. They changed the game for this guy. He was absolutely unbelievable, one of the fiercest competitors that we've likely ever seen, not only in a Cardinals uniform, but in the game. It's got to be number 2 for Bob Gibson.
So I things are starting to hit me now that there are 2 names left that I have in my top 3, and you don't have one of them on your entire top 10. So you need to explain yourself, Michelle Smallmon. Who do you have at number 1?
Okay, so I kind of cheated. Okay, I kind of cheated here, but let me explain. If this is a Cardinals list, Tony La Russa, one of the all-time iconic figures in Cardinals baseball, always would say that things were tied for first.
No, she did it like this.
Jeff, I could not put one of these guys above the other one. When I look at them, they have the same nickname. One of them is called El Hombre, and one of them is called the Man. Like these are the. I would have one above the other, and then I was like, I just can't do it. I can't put this person above this person. So I know that's breaking the rules, and I hope that you allow it.
You've done radio with me before. You know I just make up rules as I go, so that's fine. You can make up rules on the list. That's totally fine. Name their real names, not just their nicknames. Who do you have tied for first?
Tied for first, it has to be Albert Pujols and Stan Musial. I mean, these are the 2 guys, Jeff. Like, one of them I never saw play in Stan Musial, but he is number 6 is Cardinal baseball, but so is number 5. Like, I know that Albert left after he won the 2011 World Series, but all of that was absolved when he came back to the club last year. And I just cannot think of anyone that I ever covered or that I will ever watch play that will represent what Cardinals baseball is the way that Albert Pujols did. But again, Stan Musial is the franchise. Like he's the guy, right? The numbers speak for themselves. So I just thought everybody probably does the list the same way. Why don't I put like a little Cardinal spin on it, a little Tony La Russa spin, and I will make Stan Musial and Albert Pujols tied for first. I mean, one of the great moments I've ever seen is the Brad Lidge home run that Albert Pujols hit. I think that thing still has not landed. You know? So tied for first, those 2.
Okay, so I love the way that you did that. That's awesome. At number 5 for me, it's Mark McGwire. And honestly, like, of my favorite Cardinals, he would be number 1. It's when I really fell back in love with baseball. I mean, I liked baseball as a kid. I'm a big Braves fan, so we had a lot of success in the 90s. But what they did with the home run chase, it's probably the only time, I think, in my 38 years on this earth that I have every single day in the summer during a baseball season checked to see what was going on. Whether that was where the Cardinals and the Cubs were at in the standings, where Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were on the home run chase. Hey, is Ken Griffey Jr. making a run at this? And the fact that McGuire was in St. Louis and my grandfather and I got to watch that summer. Every Sunday that we'd go down like every other Sunday, maybe every third Sunday to church in Hayward, and we would get home from church quick enough to see the noon games, and we would see Mark McGuire and see if he could hit a home run. And then late in the season, they were picking up every game, so we got to watch every single one. I have an autographed bat from 1998. My aunt worked for Rawlings Sports for a long time in St. Louis, so she was the one that was providing the uniforms and the bats and all the equipment, and was in the clubhouse all the time for St. Louis. And so I have a bat that's autographed to Jeff from Mark McGuire, one of his bats from 1998 that is so special to me. And so I love Mark McGuire. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. What he did for St. Louis and the home run, I don't care of any of the other stuff. I could care less. It'll never resonate as much as what resonated for me that summer. I have McGuire at number 5. At number 4, Ozzie Smith. We already talked about all the reasons why he was great, but the backflip is one of the most iconic things, I think, in baseball as he ran to shortstop. I don't have Albert Pujols at number 2. I have him actually at number 3. And you know, I put Bob Gibson at 2. So it was really tough for me. I think you could flip a coin and you could put one or the other. Bob Gibson is probably top 3 most intimidating pitchers of all time, maybe the most intense pitcher of all time, someone that cared about his craft, I think, as much as anyone in Major League Baseball history. And you know, when you talk to another piece of memorabilia, I got a Bob Gibson autographed baseball sitting in this room with me right now. A guy that every time I talk to older players and I say, who was the toughest pitcher you ever played against, I think Bob Gibson's name comes up 8 out of 10 times just because he was so dominant and so good. But I do have Albert at number 3 for all the reasons that you said. Another name that when I think of in my lifetime, Cardinals, he's right there at the top, and the numbers can't be denied. Just a spectacular home run hitter. And then Stan the Man is number 1 for me. Here's another great memorabilia story. My grandfather wrote to him at one point and just said, "Hey, you're my favorite Cardinal. You make it fun watching Cardinals baseball." Stan personally wrote him back a postcard and detailed it out to him, signed it. And I have that also framed in my house. And it's just, that's the kind of guy he was. Yeah. As you know, he understood, like, and you know, we all know that the money has changed a lot of the ways that fans interact with baseball players. But I think Stan always went out there with 24 all-star appearances. I mean, dude was just, he was insane. So he could have been larger than life and not cared about the average fan, but he took time to write to somebody in a town of a couple of thousand in Hayward, Iowa, and sign a postcard and send it to him, and never will forget that, along with all the statistics that come along with the Hall of Famer's career. And when you have the name Stan the Man, you know you were damn good at what you did. So I have Stan Musial at number 1. Do you have any grief with my 5 through 1?
Not at all, because you didn't cheat like I did. So.
All right, so run it down for us. I'll go 10 through 1 quick. Yadier Molina at 10, Scott Rowland at 9, Roger Hornsby at 8, Willie McGee at 7, Lou Brock at 6, Mark McGuire at 5, Ozzie Smith at 4, Albert Pujols at 3, Bob Gibson at 2, and the greatest Cardinal of all time in my book, Stan the Man Musial at number 1.
I had David Freese at number 10, Mark McGuire at number 9, Rogers Hornsby at 8, Red Shandies, the redhead, at number 7, the newly minted Hall of Famer Scott Rowland at number 6, Lou Brock at number 5. Of course, Yadier Molina has to be number 4, the great Ozzie Smith at number 3, Bob Gibson at number 2, and then tied for first, as Tony La Russa always used to say, Albert Pujols and Stan Musial. And Jeff, I can't not get this stat in about Stan. I was remiss in not saying it before. My favorite baseball stat of all time. We know that Stan Musial finished his career with a .331 batting average. He had 3,630 hits, 1,815 hits at home, 1,815 hits on the road. You cannot be more consistent in your greatness than that.
That's amazing. Truly is. And certainly deserving to be number 1 on both our lists. This is the List Podcast, brought to you by Bookmaker for all your gaming needs. Check them out for the latest lines, the live lines, quick deposits, and quick withdrawals. Check them out, bookmaker.net. Let's get to the top 5 list now. So we go sports, and then we do a little entertainment and fun on the backside of this thing. And we're going to do top 5 artists of the 90s in music. And again, very subjective. It can be your favorites. It can be the number 1 hits, however you want to do it. For me, I mixed in a little bit of the Billboard charts, but with what I would listen to. Like honorable mention, shout out to Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Boyz II Men. I just didn't listen to them enough to put them in my top 5. So the floor is yours, Michelle. Give me 5 through 3, and then we'll go 2-1. Who do you have at 5, 4, and 3?
Okay, at number 5, I have Alanis Morissette.
What? I can't. I mean, this is why. Oh my God, you can pick from anyone in the '90s, and you got Alanis Morissette. That one blew my mind. Sorry, it took me along with the redhead. At least I know who she is. Okay, like this one took me for a loop. Go ahead.
There are few albums that represent the 90s the way Jagged Little Pill does. Released in 1995, that album captured the angst of the 90s. She changed the sound. She changed in a lot of ways the way women were allowed to present themselves in the 90s. She was from Canada and was a pop star, and she wrote this album on her own, fought through, and that album still slaps today. You could play every single one of those songs right now on the radio and they would be a number 1 hit. Jagged Little Pill is one of the best albums of all time, and it's certainly representative of the 90s. So I would put Alanis Morissette number 5.
Who do you got at number 4?
Number 4, when I think of the 90s, I think of East Coast, West Coast rap beef. Okay.
Yes.
And
I have a lot of that in my top 5, but go ahead.
And I wanted to put Biggie on the list because I am an East Coast girl. I am an East Coast rap fan. But when I think about those two, and I think about the 90s and the rap game as a whole, I think of Tupac. So I had to put Tupac at number 4. Not only was he one of the greatest rappers of all time, I think from a cultural standpoint, what he did, not only, acting and his political activism, I just think he was more omnipresent in the 90s. So Tupac, number 4 on the list.
Who do you got at number 3?
Number 3, when I think of the 90s, I think of boy bands, but I think of pop music. And more than boy bands, I think of the girl group of all time, and it's the Spice Girls.
Honorable mention for me. I think it was so hard for me not to put them in the top 5. I agree with you, though.
They changed everything. Like, I grew up as a child of the 90s, a young child. It was like early on in my childhood, but I can't remember a time when I wasn't with my cousins making up dances to the Spice Girls. They were a worldwide phenomenon. You could just say the word posh or the word ginger, and you think of these women. So they come in at number 3 for me.
And so that genre, and like it all started in probably like 1997, 98, 99 is when you started to have this big influx of the TRL world and the culture that came from MTV. And so you had NSYNC and you had 98 Degrees and Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys. That's where I landed at number 5. Honorable mention, I can't believe I had to leave him out, but it's only 5. Snoop Dogg, honorable mention for me. Yeah. He was so close to the top 5 for me. But I have the Backstreet Boys at number 5. I think they started everything else for One Direction. Backstreet Boys had more number 1 hits than NSYNC. They were always at the top number 1 of TRL. I'd come home from middle school in 97, 98, and all I'd want to watch is TRL. And Backstreet Boys were always trying to get knocked off. I go back to TRL so much because that's where so much of my music came from. But like, I remember they'd show up and there would just be a sea of humanity outside the MTV studios in Manhattan. And the Backstreet Boys started that phenomenon, and they opened up the door for so many other people to have those roles. What do you think about the Backstreet Boys at number 5?
I think it's criminal. NSYNC is by far the superior boy band, and it's not even close.
But who had more number 1 hits?
I don't know.
I think the answer is the Backstreet Boys. So that's why they're at number 5.
No, NSYNC was way better than the Backstreet Boys.
I don't know, man. I think I listen to probably both of them as much as anything, and I'm losing street cred as I speak because I was into the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and I still can sing Bye 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 as much as anybody. And I got the hand motion too to go with it. But I put them at number 5. At number 4, I have Madonna, and I think culturally and from just the number 1 hits and everything that came along with her career. You speak about changing the game for women and sort of how they could express themselves, sort of unapologetic. That's what Madonna did for so many people. And the music was awesome along with it. So I have Madonna at number 4. I do have the East Coast bias here with the East Coast, West Coast rap battle of the 90s. And unfortunately, we lost this person way too soon. But I have Notorious B.I.G. at number 3. Another one where, like, you play any of those albums today and they still slap. Like you said, as a dude from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, I can rap like almost every song that you put up with Biggie just because I listened to it so much as a kid throughout the 90s, into the 2000s, into my adulthood. Like, I'm one of these people, Michelle, and you may laugh at this, but I still, in my Yukon, I still have the big CD thing of all my CDs. And I pop in CDs all the time, right? And like a couple vehicles ago that I had, I don't know if it was the Chrysler 300 or the Ford Explorer, but one of them didn't have a CD player. And I was so insulted that they were no longer putting CD players in cars. And when I got my Yukon, I was so jacked up that a 2020 Yukon had a CD player in it. And so I brought back out the big case of all the CDs and I put them in all the time. And my wife is just all about Taylor Swift, so she just flips on her phone and listens to that in our car. But, like, I am still the guy that pops in the old school CDs and listens to them as I drive around. So, yes, I still have plenty of Notorious B.I.G. CDs that get popped in to my CD player in my car. Yes, I still listen to CDs. Yes.
I respect that.
What do you have at number 2 and 1?
Okay, so honorable mention for you. Number 2 for me, it's Nirvana. You can't talk about the 90s without talking about grunge, without talking about that style of music. And Nirvana was the leader in the clubhouse. How many people in the 90s were wearing flannel because of Kurt Cobain? And another person that we lost too soon, but they were the biggest force as far as grunge is concerned in the 90s. And I just think it's one of the lead genres of that time. So I had to put Nirvana number 2, and those songs still withstand the test of time as well.
I'm very intrigued. Who do you have at number 1?
So when I think of the 90s, I think of female powerhouse. I think of the divas era, right? And you had Madonna, who certainly got consideration from me. I thought about doing Whitney Houston, but a lot of her greater stuff was in the 80s.
80s, yep.
So I went with Mariah Carey, number 1. When I think of the 90s, I went back and I looked at the discography. And from 1993 to 1996, these 3 albums, Chef, Music Box, Merry Christmas, and Daydream. Music Box is one of the best-selling albums of all time, over 28 million copies to date. All I Want for Christmas Is You, that song is like the number 1 song of all time. I mean, she actually changed the way we view Christmas music and pop music. And Daydream, of course, one of the great albums of all time. Fantasy, One Sweet Day. There's just so many songs that came from the 90s that were hits that had Mariah Carey behind them. So when I think of the 90s, it's got to be her.
I pick up right where you left off because I have Mariah Carey at number 2, 21 top Billboard hits, a bunch of number 1s, and Always Be My Baby is one of my I swear to God, I embarrass myself every time it comes on because I just sing it like I am Mariah Carey. Every time I hear it, I just absolutely belt it out. And I may be on planet Earth one of the worst singers you could find. So I don't usually belt out songs, but Mariah Carey, and like you said, there's just so many songs that came on during that time. And then she started collaborating with hip hop people and having all these different sort of flavors to her music. I thought Mariah Carey was spectacular. I have her at number 2, and someone you had on your list that I have at number 1 for the cultural influences, and just I think was just so ahead of his game. If you listen to his music now, it sounds like you're listening to something that just came out, and that is Tupac. The fact that he was able to put out so much music while he was alive that was released after his death, and it still was relevant, and it still had very similar tunes to what you were listening to in that generation, like 2005. If you put out an album of Tupac, it sounded like it should fit 2005, 2010, whatever. He was so far ahead of the game. And whether that was from the lyrics or was the music itself, and just the ability to be multifaceted with a political activist and an actor. And now you see like every guy that's a hip hop star getting into those avenues too in one form or another. You didn't see that in the early 90s, late 80s. Tupac paved those ways for all those people. So I have Tupac at number 1. As I mentioned, just absolutely spectacular. So we've nailed out the list, Michelle. You got Mariah at 1. I got Tupac. Put a lot of similarities there. And the Alanis Morissette one, though, I don't know how she made number 5, but hey, good for Alanis Morissette. Hopefully she accepts the award better than David Freese does at number 10 on the St. Louis Cardinals list. Michelle Smallmon, you can check her out on ESPN Radio, hopefully alongside me sooner rather than later. I appreciate it, Michelle. Thank you so much for being a part of the list day. Hopefully this was fun for you too.
It was a blast, Chef. Thanks so much for having me. And justice for Red, justice for Alanis, okay?
I can't wait to hear what your family and friends back in St. Louis think of your top 10 list. Check us out, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Those are the places you can like, subscribe. Again, brought to you by Bookmaker and the Man Salon. Until next week when we have another list, be well, y'all. Thanks a lot for hanging out today. We look forward to seeing you next time.